Hi, I'm Ulitski, welcome to Pastel Wasteland. Today we will be looking at surveillance cameras and unexplained mysteries from Reddit. There was a TV news show here in Brazil when I was younger that showed a surveillance camera roll in which a woman was walking down the street and then just suddenly disappeared. There were no time skips on the camera, she just vanished from one frame to the other. Both my father and his brother were watching it too. We couldn't understand what happened. 1 week later, the news show seemed to have been cancelled, and we never saw or heard about it again. I tried to look for the woman who disappeared and found nothing on the internet. I had a game camera out once, and I had a neighbour who would just walk through my property. I didn't care, the place is pretty big and there's no back fence. But I kept having sheep go missing, so I set out a camera. The camera caught my neighbour walking by, then like 30 seconds later, it captured a mountain lion walking by it, stalking him. The lion apparently never attacked as he was fine, but he had had no idea how close he was to that thing. I did overnight security for my college while I was taking classes. Shifts ran from 6 PM till 6 AM. There was a hard curfew at 11:30, this was a private Christian college. At that point, the doors would lock, and I was the only way for someone to gain entry to both dorms. Other than catching curfew breakers, my job was to patrol the grounds and make frequent checks of all the doors. If a door was found unlocked, really uncommon, it was then my duty to search the building for students or possible trespassers. Now, it's worth mentioning that my college was nestled in the middle of an upscale residential neighbourhood. That being the case, the majority of our buildings were super old mansions that were purchased back in the 40s and 50s and repurposed into classroom buildings, libraries, offices, etc. All kinds of creepy stuff happened all the time. Lights would turn off and on frequently in a couple of the buildings. Students who stayed late in one building in particular often reported noises and other strange phenomena. You get used to that stuff pretty quick. You rationalise the creepy away and get on with your night. But I, a skeptical and rational thinker, had a couple of instances that still bother me. For the sake of time and space, I will tell the shortest. That one building I mentioned earlier that students complain about, it was a weird one. I had several strange experiences in and around it. One morning in particular, at around 4 AM, I was doing a round of the campus. As I walked past the building and approached our auditorium, I felt that weird feeling you get when someone is staring at you. I turn and look at the problem building instinctively. I see motion on the third floor at one of the windows. My eyes focus and see a person open the window and proceed to wave at me. My rational mind thought, maybe a faculty member came in early. All doors were locked and nothing was out of place when I checked it 5 minutes before. That was my best explanation. So I waved back and continued my round. I almost finished my circuit when I come across a resident of the neighbourhood who was out walking their dog. He stops me with some social niceties. Then out of the blue, he mentions that he walked past the problem building and someone opened the window on the third floor and waved at him. He said it creeped him out. So I got to thinking about it. No lights were on in the entire building. All entryways were locked and in order. I immediately went to search the building. Didn't hear or see anything strange. That is, except for the fact that the window this person opened and waved through was nailed shut. If that man hadn't mentioned it, I never would have given it much thought. Now he's the only reason I can't write this story off as the product of hallucinations brought on by sleep deprivation. I work security. During the weekdays I'm doing parking, while weekends I'm at the desk solo. I'll always remember this one Saturday. It was the second shift ever working the weekend, and I was watching the cameras when this one guy came to the side door. He looked around inside, and just before I could activate the speaker to let him know he was on private property, he looked directly at the camera and stared for what felt like a minute. When I took my hand away from the button, he started to walk away. I ran to the side door to see if I could see where the hell he was walking, and he was gone. The only thing that was in that direction was more freaking wall. So to this day, whenever I'm watching the cameras, I'm waiting for this guy. This happened a few years before I started working at my current job. The elevators in my building go down to the first and second basement. Late one night, one of our security guards spots a group of people heading into the elevator at level 4. He thinks it's curious because nobody is supposed to be in the building after midnight, so he keeps a close watch on all the lobby cameras to see which floor the group alights at. The doors open at basement 2, but nobody comes out. The second guard scurries down to the elevator doors whilst the first guard keeps his eye on the cameras to make sure that no one has left. When the second guard gets to the basement elevator, he looks puzzled and searches around. He comes back to the guard station to confirm that it's empty. Putting the building on lockdown, the 2 guards spend the rest of the night combing the building together, but they were unable to find anyone or anything. They decide to call the police, who review the footage and see the same thing. In the end, the sighting was still unexplained, but my workplace decided to stop being cheap and install security cameras in the elevators too. I worked at Physical Therapy Rehab Centre as an intern a few years back. A few months before I started, one of the PT staff was murdered on the way to work. It was a big deal in our community because she was a graduate from the college I went to and was pretty loved by those around her. One day, I was in the staff room and one of the cabinet doors I had opened slammed shut suddenly. Thought it was strange, but whatever. I figured I hadn't opened it all the way and the door spring kicked in. Later that day, we had a patient with cerebral palsy start motioning towards the staff room and spelling out the murdered PT's name in sign language. She was signing that the PT was floating near the ceiling and that she was crying. It seemed to really disturb her because it took a while to calm her down. The PT was murdered before the patient even started there and had no knowledge of her name. That rehab centre had its share of creepy stories because before it was used for PT, it was a boxing gym that was notorious for people dying during fights. We'll go with creepy people this time. I was 15 and had gotten a job downtown that I had to bus to. Same bus every day. The days would change, as would the start times because I was lucky and got to make my own schedule. It was actually bad luck starting with a job like that. Ever since I've done terribly with rigid schedules. One day on the bus, there was a guy who noticed some band hoodie I was wearing. He looked kind of like Marilyn Manson without his makeup on and was much older, maybe 40-ish. So we got to talking about it, which I thought was innocent enough. But then he brought up the whole, I have a recording studio in my basement, we should record you singing. No thanks. And I said no thanks and he seemed to accept it. But then every single day I worked, he would be on that bus and he'd stay on one stop later each time, until that one day he got off just one stop before mine. I was terrified and never took that bus again.